is really interesting. Well, it makes me think of something that I'm not sure. This may be a little bit of a leap, maybe not. But I was thinking probably one thing that you run into a lot in your conversations is people talking about how immigrants come here and they don't assimilate, and that's a problem. But I was thinking, and that's what this made me think of, is that if you're welcomed, like let's say this is my space and you decided you were going to come and share it with me. And if I just welcome you, like, hey, come on in. Yeah, this is great. Oh, you could have this corner here, and why don't you set up there? That's a good spot for you, or you could have it, wherever you want. And I'm just like really welcoming to you. Then you're going to just come in and like kind of make it your own, and you're going to be really open to anything. We'll all be open to each other in a way that we wouldn't be if I'm like, all right, you can come in here, but this is mine right here. You can have that, whatever you want, but this is my space. Then you're like, all right, well, I have to kind of stay myself and hold to my own things in order to like have some sense of identity, because my identity, there's a wall here. It can't expand to include this space. I'm forced to like contain it within myself. So actually the people that complain the most about assimilation are the ones that are creating the reason why a lot of immigrants are not assimilating as quickly as they might otherwise. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. Especially, so one example that pops to mind is Asian Americans are often held as this model minority.
Yeah.
And the generation or the wave of immigrants that came way back in the day, I want to say 50s, I'm not sure, they would even have the two different names. They would have their Chinese name and then they would have their American name, Shirley's and James and John's.
Right.
But what that actually does is just create these two personalities.
Mm-hmm.
So at home, they're going to be very immersed in their culture.
Mm-hmm.
And the family understands that in the home, their culture is going to not be, quote unquote, like, contaminated. And then once they're outside of the house, they're going to be westernized.
Right.
But that doesn't, that just creates this division, and that's where we have these ethnic enclaves form.
Yeah.
That are, this is the Hebrew community, this is the Chinese little Chinatown.
Chinatown, yeah.
Yeah. It's Chinatown.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I just, and it's, well, what other kinds of complaints? I mean, speaking of things that people, you talk about, they talk around the subject. How do they kind of get at it without actually addressing it directly?
Let's see. How do they get at it without addressing it directly? Well, without addressing what
immigration, or well, you said that they kind of, when the subject comes up, they kind of start moving around it. They're not like, here's the problem with immigrants. They're just like.
So the assimilation topic, now that we think about it, I was speaking with somebody, would not touch the immigration topic at all.
Oh. Uh-huh.
But what did come up was, let's see, it wasn't mass incarceration of black youths. It was just racism in general. What's been happening this entire summer,
Mm-hmm.
The shooting of unarmed black men, and I so every time I've gone to any of these events, I usually just keep my mouth shut, and it's very difficult because if anyone knows me, I am a very outspoken person.
Ah, okay.
But so they wouldn't talk about immigration at all. But once we brought up like racism against black people in the United States, they felt comfortable speaking about that because they felt that I would not be invested in this issue.
Oh.
And it was as if the floodgates kind of opened. And it came up about, well, if they dressed better and if they, quote unquote, pulled up their pants. And in my mind, what I'm hearing is, one, you don't get to tell me how I'm going to dress.
Right.
And two, so basically if I wasn't this brown person sitting in front of me, you would apply this and you would take this and say, well, if they wouldn't wear their traditional garb.
Right.
If they would just learn the language. If they wouldn't, do X, Y, Z.
Mm-hmm.
If they wouldn't cook their ethnic food that stinks up the entire apartment building. Then, so it was just like the same argument, except they were able to give it to me in this quote unquote safe space that they had created by talking about a different race.
Well, that's the interesting thing, that since, let's say, the 50s, 60s probably, activists were very successful in creating a climate where the idea of racism was anathema. Racism is a bad thing. Everybody finally agreed on that. The problem was, it didn't make a lot of people not racist. It just made them have to figure out some other way of expressing that same feeling without mobilizing the language of race. So it's like, well, they act differently, they talk differently, they do, there's a whole list, like you're saying, there's a whole giant list of things that none of them are race specific, but everybody knows who you mean when you talk about thugs or, people with their pulling their pants up or whatever that thing is. It's another way of saying it without, and that's why when you say, well, that's a racist thing to say, they go, I am not a racist. That's the farther. I don't care what color you are, as long as you don't talk like this, eat this food. It's a whole list of things that only this certain social group or class tends to do, or is maybe famous for, or stereotyped as, or however you want to look at it. Just as long as you don't do any of that stuff on that list, you're fine. I love everybody as long as they don't act like the people that I hate, that I can't say I hate because of, it's just so strange. And that's the world we live in right now. Is like, there are those of us who are walking around going, yeah, that's racist. That's racist. And it's obvious. You're not like stretching yourself to, we're not looking for it. It's just obviously racist. And then there are people going, that's not racist, that's not racist, no. Yeah. It's just so weird.
Another conversation that was quite interesting that I heard. So I had a conversation with a few people who happen to support one of our presidential candidates at the moment.
Uh-huh.
And
that would have that must have been really hard. I think I would have a very hard time.
And the argument was that this candidate was not racist.
Oh, really?
And the logic was, because you cannot be racist against Mexicans, because Mexican isn't a race.
Yeah.
Had he made racist remarks against Aztecs, who are a darker skin tone, then he would be racist. But based on what he was saying right now, he's not racist.
Okay.
Just completely interesting the way that people can rationalize an argument, and they can build upon something logically.
Oh, sure.
And have quote unquote facts, but completely miss the point.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's so important to look at yourself. I mean, this is something I wish, instead of half the stuff they teach you in school, they would teach you, like, what you really need to do in life? Look in the mirror and figure out who you are, because you do so many things without knowing why you do it. You just do it. It's automatic. You learned it from your parents or your friends or whatever. You've just always done it, and you keep doing it, and until or unless you stop and say, why do I do that? You're just going to keep doing it. And if anybody else calls you on it, if you're not the one asking why you do that, 9 times out of 10, you'll come up with a good excuse for why you do it. You're not really challenged. You're challenged, but the challenge is more of like a threat, and so you have to counter the threat. It's different when you do it to yourself. If you look in the mirror and say, why do I always do this? That's not a threat. That's like, you're attacking yourself from within, sort of. There's nothing to fight against. You can't, well, I guess some people fight against themselves, but for the most part, it's a real genuine question. But when somebody else does it, then you're like pushing back, like, wait a minute, I'm not, doing anything like that. So it's like, that's, self-reflection is so important.
Right. And one thing that I heard resonate in my research, at least, was many people felt unheard.
Yeah.
They felt that they were ignored, and they felt that, so the Midwest is going through, or has been going through, like, mass deindustrialization.
Yes.
And these people feel their concerns have not been addressed. And so when you try to force these ideas that don't affect them directly, you're further like pushing them away.
Yeah.
And it's so sad. It's so sad to hear this entire party basically say that we're not being heard. Our representatives are not listening to us anymore. Like, they're not acting in our best interests.
Well, that's true.
And it's sad that there's two different sides. Not even two. There's so many different sides, and everybody's saying, I'm not being heard.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it comes down to. There's no dialogue. There's no connection there.
Well, yeah, but it's not true. But I guess you know that, so I don't have to argue with that point, because you already know that that point is not true. The problem is twofold, obviously. Lack of a decrease of privilege from a state where your concerns were the concerns and everybody worried about it, to a state where yours are one of many. That feels like a big loss. What it reminds me of is in a patriarchal society, what happens to a lot of men, who grow up being babied and privileged, is they get out into the world and suddenly women aren't treating them like mom did, Yeah. So mommy was like, oh, honey, what is it? I'm endless. Let me wash your this, And they're like, what's wrong with these girls? They don't respect me. They're not, they're all stuck up, and and it's like, no, you're a jerk. And you never learned how to be like, treat other people like human beings, so you're being treated the way you deserve, not badly because these people are mean. They're just treating you, they're reacting to you. You're being creepy, and they're reacting as if you're creepy. But you don't get that because you don't see your creepiness. And that's what, to me anyway, that's what I see writ large in the entire sort of right-wing world right now, is this sense of like, hey, we used to be it. I was going to say some other slang expression that is not appropriate for the radio, but and suddenly we're not it anymore. We're just kind of, and people are kind of going, yeah, and you're kind of jerks too, and so we're tired of this, and we don't have to take it anymore. And they're like going, what? Now you're not only not catering to me, you're acting mean to me. You're being mean. You're saying mean stuff to me. I don't like that. It's like, stop being a jerk. That's kind of the... Anyway, sorry.
We went on a trip last semester to Detroit.
Oh, yeah?
And we met with a lot of community development organizations. Mm-hmm. And these people had been in Detroit for like years and years. And one thing we kept hearing was a lot of frustration. People are like, Detroit's always had these problems. All of a sudden, we're in the spotlight now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those problems have existed. They haven't been in the limelight because they didn't affect certain populations.
Well, yeah. A lot of people are wondering, why are police killing people randomly these days? They've been doing that forever. Now everybody's got a camera in their pocket and they can film it. That's the difference. That's the only thing that's changed, is now we see that this is happening, and now we have the people that it's happening to are saying, you know what? We're done. We're through with that. And other people are going, what do you mean? You can't say that. You can't tell me no. That's not how it works. But yeah, it works that way now. So anyway, I'm sorry. That's kind of out on a real limb, isn't it? That we're getting sort of off the track. But I mean, this does relate to immigration and immigrants, and in the sense that, you getting a place at the table, so to speak, to use a phrase, it takes time. You can't just walk in and go, where's my chair? Move over. I'm coming in. That just doesn't work. So people tend to they kind of come in and they sort of sneak in and try and figure out where they can fit, and it takes some time to maneuver until here's a spot, I can kind of fit over here. And then before you know it, you're kind of seated, maybe make a few quiet suggestions, and the person turns around like, oh, okay, we'll listen to you. And then eventually you're there, but it doesn't happen all at once. So there's a lot of dancing, sort of social dancing, that has to be done when you first come, and there's a lot of that resistance that, as you well know, that you run into. It's kind of strange. Sorry, I'm talking too much. You guys
No,
need-
it's
talk.
You say fascinating things. Yeah, I like listening. I sort of wish I was at home with like a glass of wine just listening to you guys.
Sorry, I'm so used. I do the show by myself most of the time,
Okay.
so I get used to, like, I start on an idea and then I kind of keep going, and I just, because I'm trying to talk about
Yeah.
stuff. But Go
what
ahead.
interested me about Grant, I just spent a few days in Pilsen, and you mentioned that you lived in
Yeah, I
Pilsen.
lived there.
Yeah,
like
can you
6 years.
Can you speak to that? How was your experience? Because you were probably seen kind of as an outsider in Pilsen.
Yeah, definitely. So it's funny. I moved to Chicago after did my undergrad in Minnesota, and I only knew a handful of people in Chicago, but everybody was like, "Don't move to Pilsen. It's dangerous. You'll be shot."
Mhm.
And I thought, I just need cheap rent. Like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go to Pilsen. I don't care. So I always felt like very hyper aware because I went there with this notion of like, I am gonna get mugged at any given time, and I was so jumpy. And after a few months, I felt so safe there. People are always outside. And I thought it was unusual at first, and then I grew to really love all those eyes on the street. Even at midnight or 1 a.m., like, kids would be playing outside. People are just, like, on their stoops drinking and hanging out and using that as, like, their space.
Yeah.
And I always loved it, but I definitely felt like I was one of the first waves of gentrifiers to be there.
Oh, really?
So I didn't, at first it was fine, but towards the end of my time in Pilsen when I moved here in 2014, then there was this kind of backlash, because like that final year, all of a sudden, a whole new wave of like hipster restaurants and bars had opened up. And it was all these new people started coming in, but I felt like by that time I had already made myself part of the community. Not that I am Hispanic. I don't speak Spanish at all, but I'd like go to the grocery store that was down the street from me. I'd go get coffee at the local spot.
Right.
So people like knew my presence, and I like, you know, those familiar faces. So I always felt okay, but I also felt a little bit guilty at the same time that like I wasn't going there because it was hip. I was going there because like anyone else, I needed a cheap rent.
Right.
And then consequently it became kind of this hip spot to go to. But I have fond memories of Pilsen, and like I really love it, and I think it gets a bad rap when it really shouldn't, because it's very safe there. There's so many families that are there. You can walk so many places. There's parks that are there. It's so easy to get into the loop. I can't say good enough things about it. What were you doing there?
We were attending a conference, and that's where we got our Airbnb. We loved it. One thing I did notice, though, there was an enormous amount of houses being renovated. People are moving in, and I loved it because that's the kind of city I grew up in. And it's that the exact same thing is happening the world over with gentrification. But it was very interesting, like the amount of houses that are being renovated. The Airbnb we stayed in, like I'm sure, you know, that created some animosity there, that who are these young kids that are, you know, consequently going to raise the rents in the neighborhood. Really, I liked it.
Well, I think what's interesting with gentrification, especially with Pilsen, is how the people that are there right now are thinking, well, we're getting pushed out. This is where we belong. But at the same time, it used to be Eastern Europeans that were there, and the Latinos that moved in pushed them out. So, like, cities are always changing. It never belongs just to one person. But I think of it, like, to the story of, like, the table and how it was, like, mostly white people and Republicans that ran this country. I can't think of the word at all.
Whatever this thing is.
Yeah. It's just like, it's always changing. It's so ephemeral. Like, you never have a permanent spot at all. I don't know where I was going with that, but
Well, that's the thing. In a perfect world, let's say, that would happen in a smooth, kind of comfortable way, where people would come, people would go, and yeah, maybe there'd be a little pushing, but it wouldn't be like what happens with colonization, for example, when you come over, you just take over like how this country became this country. It's like, okay, we'll come in, we'll kill you, or move you off, or whatever, and now it's our country. That's one way of doing it. Not a very good way. I don't recommend it. Where was I going with this? But gentrification. The problem with that is, maybe somebody moves in, but I think when the Latinos moved in and the Eastern Europeans moved out, it wasn't because these guys suddenly the rents were raised and these guys were moving. It was more like they move in and these guys go, I don't want to live with you, so they move somewhere else. It was more of a sort of a natural displacement. With gentrification, it's more like I come in and buy everything and like, oh, you can't afford to live here anymore, so sorry, you just pushed out.
Right, and it's much more violent.
Yeah.
It's
disruptive in ways that the usual ebb and flow of people coming and going isn't. There's always a little discomfort. I mean, if you're moving out because you feel unsafe because those people are here now, that's kind of violent, and it's unpleasant for you and you don't like it, but it's your choice. You could do what you did and just like, well, let's see what they're like. Oh, they're a little different from the way I was raised, but hey, that's kind of cool that they do this way. And you get used to it, and they accept you, and you accept them, and everything's fine.
And there's also that kinship in class there. You needed affordable rent, they need affordable rent. It's not these massive corporations or, people with lots and lots of money who are coming in who don't need to be there. But that's where they're going to make the maximum amount of profit, and they're moving in to just land grab and land speculate and capitalize off of it. That's where the violence is, where it's not benefiting somebody, it's completely changing the tax bracket of people that live there.
I mean, my actual job in life, I work as a director of a nonprofit that works with preservation, like historic preservation. And one way that this sort of thing affects us, it's interesting. I have conversations about gentrification with a lot of different people. When I'm with my social justice friends, it's like, oh, gentrification is really bad. When I get with my preservation friends, it's like, oh, gentrification is great because these people are saving these, everything was run down and they're going in and fixing it up. Wow, this is a good thing. So there's there's trade-offs happening here.
It's tough too because I think it always gets a really bad name, and when people are displaced, that is awful. But in a lot of these deindustrializing cities that are losing populations, if you can have a tax base and have people moving in, I think it's a really good thing then. If you can make this city or certain neighborhoods appeal to someone to move there over New York or San Francisco and have a brain drain from this region.
Well, where was it? There's someplace in the South. I forget. Not Atlanta, but there's another city in. Is it Charleston? I don't know. There's something where there's some big banks there, and so even though the textile industry is closed down, but the banks have moved in, and so now all this
Charlotte's
is
had a really big
maybe it is
finance boom in the last 20 years or so.
So suddenly this is a hot spot to live, where before it was dead. There was nothing there, So that kind of thing, I think gentrification is good, where you've got a place that's just crumbling. And parts of Detroit are like this too, where it's just the whole place is it's bombed out like a hurricane came through.
Interesting with Detroit is I feel like so many people think that there's nobody there because it's lost so many people, but there's still 700,000 people that are there, 600,000. It's still a big city. We just forget about it.
Well, they're places like in St. Louis is similar to this. They're whole neighborhoods where there's blocks that have just been leveled. There's nothing there. They just there was nobody living there, and it was turning into crack houses and stuff, so they just tore it all down. So you drive in some neighborhoods, and it's not parks, not anything, just big expanses of grass or weeds, And it does have this sort of empty feeling. There are places in Peoria is kind of like that too, in some places where there's just everybody moved out, everything was crumbling, and they just took it all down, and now there's nothing. Nobody's built anything new there. So I think maybe it just depends on where you go. You get the sense of desolation in some places, some of these big cities that just didn't turn into an urban boom or something. We're kind of getting close to the end of our time here. Was there any point that either of you wanted to make that we didn't get to because I was too busy blabbing about whatever?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, sometimes people come in and they've got like, I want to say this, and then I don't give them a chance because I'm talking about some. Gosh, I need to learn to just keep my hand. I'd like sit on my hands or something. I gesticulate a lot when I talk. It doesn't do a bit of good on the radio because nobody can see it, but they hear
But
me.
the camera's back there, so people are watching on YouTube.
Oh, they're watching. Well, yeah,
they can see it.
I suppose, yeah, probably. But anyway, yeah. So we have a couple more minutes. We don't have to stop talking. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to get out your talking points if your campaign manager has told you got to go there and talk about unemployment, something like that. No.
No, I didn't really come in with an agenda at all. I didn't know what to expect.
Yeah, same.
Well, I hope it wasn't like, oh my God, I'm never going to do that again. Because I like to just have a fun conversation with people.
And that was really good, the introduction that you gave us about how a lot of people really don't have experiences with interacting with immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I didn't, like, I don't know to speak about my experiences. I don't know if that's going to help anything. I feel like the whole world's been through, everyone thinks that what they went through is what the whole world went through.
That's true. That's true. I grew up thinking that my life was that's the way life was. And it took me years of having people go, oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Is that weird?
Right?
Was it weird that I did that? And finally after a while I was like, okay, maybe my life was kind of strange in some ways, but yeah, it's different. It's different when you're sort of like your whole community, your whole history, everything is in this place, and you grow up there and you belong there. There's a sense of belonging, I think. I've certainly never felt that, but I know some people talk about just like, well, this is my home. Everything here is. I've always felt sort of like a stranger here, even though maybe the town I grew up in, but it's always felt a little strange to me because it wasn't mine. It wasn't my family's. It didn't. There's not like Uncle so and so or Grandpa whoever that used to have live there or do this. It was just like, nope, we came here and like you planted a seed and here you are and make the best of it. Try and figure it out. And so I'm like walking around going, well, how do people do things here? And yeah, it's strange. I mean, there's so much we didn't get into. This, like, we were talking about racism earlier, and when you were mentioning like people avoiding race, it took me a long time to recognize, I guess, not realize, but recognize instances where people were rejecting me because of the way I looked or because of my name.
Yes.
I now always spell my name when I say my name to somebody. I do it because over the years, everybody was always like, huh? What's that? And, everybody says, okay, I just say my name, Tom Garza, Garza. And I spell it very carefully for them. It's such a habit that I don't even think about it anymore. But I learned that. Nobody taught me that. I learned that because people were always like, what? Can you spell it? What? How's that? Gurdeep, and they're writing something down. And I got a lot of the what are you question. I don't look at, that's the weird thing about getting older, you kind of bleach out or something. You sort of lose your coloring. But I used to be a lot darker and black hair and stuff like that. And I used to get a lot of questions like, where are you from? What are you? All that kind of thing. And I at various times thought, oh, I'm exotic or I'm whatever. But ultimately I finally realized like, oh, they're noticing difference and they're trying to figure out what it is.